All right. Yes. Okay. So starting now, there is video as well for those of you who want that. Anyway, so this is Roma, and there's something I've been wanting to talk about. Um, it's one of those things that's always bothered me. I think, you know, what I do by intellectual instinct is kind of like what comedians do, which maybe that's why I got along pretty well with the whole comedy crew in LA and New York. Like what, by nature, I think what we do is we just notice things that don't make sense or things that seem like, that doesn't fit with the things around it, you know? Um, and you can call it critical thinking, or you can call it being an ornery bastard, or you can call it all kinds of different things. But I think it's just sort of an intellectual habit, which makes you a really bad student in grade school and high school because you're a pain in the ass. You're the kid who's saying like, yeah, but why does this matter? Like, we'll have calculators. I don't need to learn this. And what's trigonometry have to do with life? And you're that kid that the teacher fucking hates. But then if you go to college and you continue in philosophy or literature or history or something like that, it could really work to your advantage, as it did for me, because that's exactly what they want you to do. The thing they've been trying to beat out of you for the last 12 years suddenly becomes the thing that is most valuable. Critical thinking. Read this argument and find the flaws. Find the weak points. Find the fallacies. Find the false premises. Like that's exactly what works as an adult sort of intellectual person. But ironically, you got to get through 12 years without letting them fucking stamp it out of you, because nobody wants a 15-year-old questioning the premise of the class. I did that one time. I remember in history in high school, maybe 10th grade or so. And it was like AP history, which is advanced placement for non-Americans. So it's kind of like for the smart kids, you're lucky to be in the class and all that. And the teacher was cool. Mr. Bent, I remember, was his name. And he had handlebar mustache, that like went up into his beard. Like he looked like Crosby from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. So he was kind of a cool dude. And I don't remember what we were talking about, but I, for some reason, thought it was totally irrelevant to my life. And I pointed that out. And so I was basically like, so what is the point of studying history? Like, why are we doing this? And I remember the other kids looking at me like, are you fucking crazy? How could you even ask that question? But to his credit, Mr. Bent laughed. And for the next half hour or so, we talked about the relevance of studying history. And it's interesting how I still remember that day, because I knew I was being a dick, I guess. But I also thought that was a legitimate question. Like, before we spend the next 10 weeks doing this, can we just talk about why we're doing this? Whether this is really worth doing? And so similarly, I read a piece by Andrew Sullivan. He just posted a couple days ago, The Weekly Dish on Substack. And Andrew Sullivan is a guy, I've met Andrew Sullivan. I've seen Andrew Sullivan's penis, interestingly. I went to my one and only, I think, Bear Bar with Andrew Sullivan and Dan Savage and Chris Budener and Carsey Blanton, I think. The five of us, because Dan and I had done, it was the day I met Carsey, and we recorded a podcast in Brooklyn at her friend's place where she was staying. And then that was early afternoon. And then like 4 o'clock or something, I had this event in a big church with Dan Savage, like a big church, like a cathedral. And Dan and I were on a panel. I don't remember the details of it, but it was a big deal. There were probably 500, 1,000 people in the audience. And it was, I think it was a panel discussion about sexuality and, monogamy and relationships and all that kind of stuff. So it was a progressive church. And it was like a Sunday afternoon, I think. Anyway, so I mentioned to Carsey that I was going to do this thing with Dan Savage, and she was like, oh my God, I love Dan Savage. And I said, well, if you want to come with me, I'll introduce you. And she's like, fuck yeah. So we went together, and she met Dan, and then I guess Dan was going to be meeting Andrew and Chris after for dinner or something. And then so Dan invited us along. So we ended up all having dinner. And then Andrew was like, I want to take you guys to my favorite Bear Bar, because Andrew's into bears. Bears, for those of you who don't know, are large, hairy gay men. And so we went to this Bear Bar in the West Village. And I remember at one point, Andrew and Dan and I all went to the men's room at the same time. And it was like one of those troughs that you pee in. Women, if you've never been in a men's room, like in some places, especially like stadiums, instead of having individual urinals, they'll just have this long stainless steel trough, and everyone just pisses into the trough. Anyway, this place had a trough like that, and we were standing there peeing, and it occurred to me that I was standing between probably the two best known gay men in America. And I said made some smart ass remark about how, here I am, like, thousands of gay men would pay their life savings to be standing where I am right now between you two with your dicks in your hands, and it's all wasted on me. Anyway, why the fuck am I telling that story? I guess to say that I really like Andrew Sullivan and I respect his writing. I think he's super, super smart, and I really enjoy what he does, but sometimes I disagree with him. Which leads me to another point. I got an email this morning from a guy named Sam who's been listening to the podcast for a long time. And he wrote to me and he said, in 15 years of listening to this podcast, the only thing you've ever said that made me uncomfortable was that you had some admiration for Scott Galloway. And he sent me a paragraph that Scott Galloway had said, apparently, at some point, where Scott was making the point that that there was hypocrisy involved in the way a lot of people respond to Israel and what's going on in Gaza and what's been going on for 2 years now, calling it genocide and telling the Israelis that, it's abhorrent and they should stop and all that. Scott Galloway's point was, the Hamas invaded Israel, took prisoners, held them in tunnels for years. If the Mexicans had done that, if the Mexicans had come across, the Rio Grande and seized a bunch of Americans and held them in tunnels and tortured them and so on, like we would have just fucking decimated Mexico. And nobody would have said, stop, it's genocide, whatever. Like we would have just gone nuts on them. And so anyway, Scott's point was that there's hypocrisy in telling the Israelis, you can't do this, it's genocide, blah, 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 where when America does it, even, in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, we don't see it the same way. Like it's a special case with the Israelis. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that Sam seems to think that I should disavow any respect for Scott Galloway because of that one point or position that he holds or has held. And what I tried to explain is it's not about the guy. It's not about the person. It's about the argument. So someone I deeply respect and admire can say something I disagree with. And someone who I think is a total shithead, like Andrew Tate, can occasionally say things I agree with. So it's not, I try not to accept or reject the person. I try to accept or reject the argument, which can be problematic because you can end up offending your friends because, it feels like friendly fire when a friend writes or says something and they see me comment on it like, I don't agree with that. I think, blah, blah, blah. But if you're truly an intellectual, you also distinguish between yourself and your arguments. So, if someone says, look, I think what you wrote in Sex at Dawn about, this bonobo troop and their behavior, blah, 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 is misleading or inaccurate or something, I'm totally down with that. I appreciate that. Whereas if someone says, you're a fucking idiot, and it's all, you don't even understand, then I don't have time to even pay any attention to that because that person is attacking me personally. Whereas the first example is someone who's critiquing an argument or a position or a point, which is separate from me. So similarly, Scott Galloway can feel the way he feels about Israel, and that doesn't affect my feelings about how he feels about, the travails of young men in America right now, or, investing advice or whatever other shit that he's into. So anyway, that's my point. I'm encouraging you to respond to arguments, not the person. It's not a package deal, right? So here's Andrew Sullivan, who I think is incredibly intelligent and incredibly decent and kind. And I think he wrote something stupid here. So I'll read it to you. Quote, war is a terrible, terrible thing and can spin easily into barbaric violence and cruelty on all sides. That's why the core principles are so clear and so vital in keeping some semblance of civilization intact. By the way, he's commenting on this recent kerfluffle about Trump and Hegseth and the U.S. military bombing these boats in the Caribbean. I'm not even going to call them drug boats because nobody's ever proven there were any drugs on them, although I noticed the media is calling them drug boats. But anyway, that's the story, right? That they're running drugs up to the United States on open outboard motor, fucking fishing boats, which doesn't make any sense at all. That's not the way you smuggle drugs, but okay. Anyway, so Andrew Sullivan's upset about this, and that's what he's writing here, basically about how this violates the law, the rules of war, right? Okay, so that's why the core principles are so clear and so vital in keeping some semblance of civilization intact. Americans, more to the point, have fought and won wars within these boundaries for over 250 years, and we have beaten regimes and terrorists that observed no moral norms at all. Okay, Andrew. So the Americans have fought and won wars within these boundaries, but by boundaries, he's talking about ethical, moral boundaries, for over 250 years. So 250 years. That's how long America has been around. What the fuck rules were we following when we lied and cheated and tricked the Native Americans from the beginning? When we gave them blankets infected with smallpox because we knew it would kill them. When we wiped out the bison, just shot them, and let them rot in the sun so that the Lakota wouldn't have any food to eat. Wipe out their entire way of life. What rules were we following, Andrew? Rules of war? Rules of engagement? Give me a fucking break, man. And then we've beaten regimes and terrorists that observe no moral norms at all. Dude, just because they're on the other side of the war doesn't mean they have no moral norms at all. I don't think any society that's ever existed has had no moral norms at all. They have morals, they just don't align with yours. But that doesn't give you the right to say they don't exist. That's bullshit right there. And, ironically, it's the kind of bullshit that provides intellectual cover for the very thing that Andrew is arguing against, right? Andrew is saying we need to follow these rules because the rules of war are the only thing that keeps civilization intact, blah, blah, blah. Dude, when you demonize your enemy as having no moral norms at all, you're basically saying he's not human. And when you dehumanize, that's what allows the kind of behavior that you're decrying to exist. Because your enemy is not human. They don't deserve to be treated as humans. So we can just blow them up. Back to Andrew. This is America. We don't murder. We don't torture. We fight. What are you, 4 years old, dude? This is America. We don't murder. We don't torture. We fight. I think Andrew's watched Saving Private Ryan a few times too many. Because here's the fact. We do murder. We do torture. Fuck, we torture our own citizens. We're torturing people right now that we're picking up, ICE is picking up, while they're waiting outside the school to pick up their children. ICE sweeps in, grabs everybody with brown skin, throws them in fucking vans, handcuffs them, sends them off to some fucking holding cell in the middle of nowhere, doesn't give them the opportunity to even call their kids and let them know where mom is. We don't torture? Oh, this is America? Are you fucking kidding me? And this isn't just the recent Trump shit. Look up the School of the Americas, where regimes from all over the world, particularly Latin America, sent their military officers to Georgia to learn how to torture, to get the information that you need so that you can go and kill the villagers who dare to stand up to Coca-Cola and United Fruit Company and Anaconda Copper. Yeah, we don't fucking torture. Are you kidding me, dude? The United States has probably tortured more people per capita than any other country in the existence of the planet, 100,000 Indonesians were killed in the 60s on the direction of the CIA and fucking, what's his name? Kissinger. How many Cambodians, Laotians, Vietnamese have been tortured by the American military? How many children were tortured as they burned to death in their fucking straw bamboo hut that was lit on fire by American flamethrowers? I mean, give me a fucking napalm drop from the sky, sticks to you and burns through your body. Are you kidding me? We don't torture, dude? We don't murder? I got a list. I could come up with probably 50 people off the top of my head that the American intelligence services and or military murdered. I'm not talking about collateral damage. I'm talking about targeted assassination, ranging from inconvenient heads of state who dared to say, we're not going to keep sending all our money to the World Bank. We're going to use it to feed our starving children in this country or set up medical clinics or schools. Oh no, that's not acceptable. You owe us. You owe the World Bank because we went in and lent a bunch of money to the former president who we installed, and then he took that money and put it in his Swiss bank account, but your country is on the hook for it even though none of you ever saw any of that money. It's all just a scam between us and the guy that we put in power 50 years ago, and you'll be paying for it for the rest of the time. Talk to Chile about that. Talk to Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua. Talk to Cuba. Talk to any of these countries. It's all a fucking scam. We don't torture. Fuck. This is the thing. This is like, I just put an article about David Brooks a couple days ago on Substack. And you've heard me bitch and moan about Fareed Zakaria and these guys. It's like, yeah, you're smart. You're probably way smarter than I am, but you're a good boy. And good boys don't interrupt class to say, why the fuck are we studying history? Good boys just do their homework, like good boys. So good boys, even Andrew Sullivan, who definitely thinks outside the box regularly, who I'm sure you give him an IQ test, you give me an IQ test, I'm sure he's 20, 30 points beyond me. I'm not. This is the other thing. It's like, I'm not saying I'm smarter than Andrew Sullivan, but I am saying I can see that this argument that he's making is so fucking stupid and historically blind. So it's not about him. It's about what he wrote here. This is America. We don't murder. We don't torture. We fight. The first two are not an intensification of the fight. They are its negation. Grown men, especially those who have seen war close up, as Andrew has not, by the way, have always known this. Okay, so he's speaking for men who have been in wars and seen them close up and saying what they have seen, which I think is intellectually dubious. But draft dodgers like Trump and insecure boys like Hegseth cannot comprehend the deeper strength of restraint or the enduring power of moral example. But Washington did. George Washington did, and that made all the difference. To coin a phrase, it was what made America great. All right, look. You want to believe this fucking Disney fantasy version of America? I guess you can do that, but it blinds you to reality. And it blinds you to understanding why people around the world don't see America that way and never have. Restraint. The deeper strength of restraint and the enduring power of moral example. Remind me again of the only country that's ever dropped nuclear bombs on people. Remind me of the country that firebombed Dresden. I think 100,000 people may have died that night, civilians. Dresden, that had no military significance at all. The only reason we firebombed Dresden was to try to break the spirit of the Germans by showing them that even those of you who don't live near a military installation or factories that have any military value, even there you're not safe. We'll burn you to death. What the fuck kind of moral example is that? This is exactly what we're demonizing Putin for doing, right? If you watch the news, it's all about how Ukraine hits military installations and oil refineries and, stuff that is involved in the war. But they don't just hit apartment buildings or schools. But Putin does. Putin just bombs civilians. Well, that's what we were doing. That's what we did in Germany. It's what we did in Japan. And to be clear, I'm not arguing whether firebombing Dresden shortened the war and ended up saving more people than died that night, or whether dropping the nuclear bombs on Japan was the right move or not. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is this vision of American history as being one of decency and moral restraint is fucking bullshit. We installed the Shah of Iran because we wanted control of the oil of Persia. We did this together with the Brits. And the Shah of Iran sent his intelligence service to America to be trained in torture. There's no controversy around this. If you study history at all, read a book about the installation of the Shah, I think it was in the mid to late 50s, there's no controversy that that's what happened. There's no controversy who did it, why they did it, and there's no controversy that the Iranian intelligence service was one of the most feared, despicable, torturous regimes in the world, and that it was funded and trained by the U.S. Same thing with Chile under Pinochet. Same thing with the Argentinians in the 70s and the Brazilians in the 70s. Same thing with Guatemala in the 80s. Same thing with Nicaragua in the 70s. Why do you think there were revolutions in these places? So I'm not arguing about whether it was a good thing or bad thing in World War II. I don't know. I'm not an expert on World War II, but I can tell you that this vision of the United States as being a bastion of military restraint and decency and, we don't murder, we don't torture, this is just absolutely bullshit. And the thing is, I've never been in a war, so I won't claim to speak for people who have seen war up close and personal, but my impression is that all this bloviating about the rules of war and this, sacred, decent rules of war it's kind of like the prohibition of going to a slaughterhouse. So we've built up all this sort of linguistic and behavioral distancing from the reality. My impression is that the reality of war is fucking horrible. People freak out. Innocent people get killed left and right. People do things they can't believe they're doing. They never would have imagined themselves capable of. I think that's the reality of war. And I think all this rules of war is partly a way to try to stop it from getting totally out of control, but also a way of making it acceptable. You know, we sanitize the language. Oh, collateral damage. We have to destroy the village to save it. This kind of shit that was really a big thing in Vietnam, but has continued ever since then. It's a way of draining the blood from the reality of the situation and sanitizing it and making it acceptable. And I kind of find that to be morally reprehensible, because I think we should see what war is. We should know what war is, just like we should know where our meat comes from. We should know who's picking our vegetables. We should know the reality of how things are manufactured and the piles of trash that are created when we, by our consumer consciousness and all that. And the hiding of the reality is a way of perpetuating the very thing that we claim to be opposed to. So those are my thoughts on the rules of war. What else? Oh, was I going to talk about this? I don't know. There's some things. I have a new idea for a book, but a book that I think I'm going to write, but I don't want to talk about it too much. I did that in the past, and it kind of drained some of the energy out of it. But suffice it to say, I think it's time to write a follow-up to Sex at Dawn. And more sort of like, how are these principles applied in modern life rather than the anthropology and the primatology and all that. So the question I would ask you, and maybe you can help me with this if you're listening to this and you're interested in these issues. Do you think your sexuality, as it pertains to non-monogamy? So first of all, I guess the first question is, if you were free to live however you wanted to live without hurting anyone or sacrificing intimacy or family or whatever, would you choose a monogamous relationship, or would you choose a non-monogamous life? And whatever your answer to that is, the real question I want to get at is, do you feel that you have any choice in that? Of course, you have choice in the behavior. But what I'm trying to get at is, do you have a choice concerning your orientation or your appetite or your desire? There's a line I quoted in Sex at Dawn. I forget who said it, but it was in German, maybe Schopenhauer or something. But the line is, we can choose what we do, but we can't choose what we want to do. So that's my question. Do you agree with that? Do you think you can choose what you want? Or is your appetite somehow innate and not open to, it's open to choice in terms of how you respond to it, but the appetite itself, the desire itself, is that something you control or not? That's one of the central themes of this book I'm thinking about. So if you have an opinion on that, I'd be grateful to hear it. You could send it to me as a voice memo. We don't do those much anymore, but I'd be happy to. Just record it on your phone and send it to me at thatchrisryan@gmail.com. And in the subject line, just put voice memo, and you could put monogamy voice memo or something if you want. All right, so I'm going back to the AMA because some of that stuff I didn't get to last time, some of the questions you sent in, and also some of them I realized my answers weren't as complete as I wanted. So one of them was from Juan, who asked me about food, and I went off on this whole thing about how I'm a little less adventurous with food than I am in other areas of life, and that's sort of embarrassing in some ways or whatever. But there are other thoughts I had later thinking about that question. One of the things I would say that I've learned about food was from living in Spain was the importance of combining quality ingredients and simplicity of preparation. Like I'd grown up, like most Americans, with canned peas. And, you'd have them, pork chops and mashed potatoes and peas that were just from a can and heated up. And they're kind of mushy, and they're kind of a weird grayish green color. I don't know what they're like now, but that's what they were like in the 70s. And didn't taste great, but presumably they had some sort of nutrients. And I remember being in Spain one time, and early when I was first living there, and every day I was out teaching English, and I would go to a restaurant for the menu del dia, which is the midday meal, normally 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it normally was 3 plates. So there would be first plate, which would be a salad or a soup or a vegetable or something, and then a second plate, which was the fish or the meat or whatever, and then there would be dessert, or you could switch out the dessert for a cortado, and they were very inexpensive, and it was kind of a way of getting business, and you'd go back there for dinner, and they'd make more money when you went back for dinner. But there's kind of a loss leader, and it's a very typical thing in Spain. So you can always eat really well for like, 10 euros or something. You have a 3-4 course meal, and it's delicious. Anyway, the first plate, I remember, and you have a choice of 3 or 4 of first and 3 or 4 second. And the first one of the plates was, guisantes. And I remember I didn't know the word, and I looked it up, and it's peas. And I was like, peas? Like a whole plate of peas? Like that? Peas are like a side dish, next to your mashed potatoes. Like, why would you have a plate of peas? That just sounds weird, And so I ordered it, and he brings this plate, and yeah, it's a plate of peas with some little cubed ham, little pieces of ham, and a little garlic. And they're just sauteed. They're fresh peas, and they're sauteed in olive oil with the ham and the garlic. And first of all, they're totally different color, just like a beautiful, almost electric, almost neon green, just wow, green, and like, it's like they're alive. It's like they were picked 20 minutes ago. And you take a forkful of these peas, and you taste peas. You taste this delicious vegetable that I had never tasted before. What I had tasted was like some distant echo of the flavor of a fucking pea that was, jolly green gianted to death. And it had nothing to do with the peas I grew up tolerating. This was a fucking celebration. This was a goddamn orgiastic entertainment, enjoyment of penis. It was fantastic. And the little bit of ham, the saltiness of the ham and the high quality olive oil. And it was like, are you fucking kidding me? This is fantastic. And all it is fucking fresh peas with a little ham, little garlic, little olive oil, quick saute, put them on the plate, out they go. And so, point being, you take something really good and you don't fuck with it. You don't throw fucking cheese sauce on it, or, melted Velveeta or whatever the fuck we do in America. Everything's got cheese, and it's not even cheese. It's something that comes out of a giant factory created tank. And I mean, Jesus, the shit we eat. That's what I learned in Spain. High quality ingredients, very simple preparation. And I feel like, isn't that life? Isn't that the way we should live our lives as well? Simple. I don't need to have 50 friends. I don't need my friends to be rich or famous or beautiful. I just want them to be real. If I eat peas, I want to taste peas. If I'm with Cameron, I want to be with Cameron. If I'm with Martin, I want to be with Martin. I want to get the essence of this person, of this friend that I love. I don't need more than that. I don't need it to be a big fucking extravaganza. So that was something I learned in Spain about food and how food can inform the rest of life. I remember on that same subject, Casilda and I were watching an episode of a show called Rome on HBO. This was 30 years ago, probably. It was like a mini series or something about, life in Rome. It was fictionalized. And what we normally in Spain, you'd have your big meal midday, as I described. And then in the evening, we'd have, normally something light, right? You'd have some asparagus, again, like fresh asparagus, steamed with a little olive oil on it, so it's crunchy and oh yeah. And some slices of ham and some slices of manchego cheese and a little toasted bread with olive oil and salt on it, and maybe some sliced tomatoes and some olives. And then we would just sort of snack on that while we watch TV at night or something. And so we're sitting there, we're watching the show Rome, and we're eating that stuff and a little red wine. And it occurs to me that we're watching people eating, these people who lived 2,000 years ago, and they're sitting there and they're eating olives and cheese and ham and a little bread and some olive oil, and they're drinking red wine. And we're eating exactly the same things 2,000 years later watching the show. Again, there's something really beautiful about that. There's something like, I know that is good food because people have been eating it for 2,000 years. That's good shit. People have not been eating Taco Bell for 2,000 years. I can guarantee you that. All right, how long have I been talking? 46 minutes. Okay, I'll go on a little longer. Yeah. Adam Martin asks, what are some of the notable moments in your life that affected you in such a way that you were never the same again? Who were you before and who did you become after? And how did that affect the way you navigated through life? That's such a deep, deep question that any response to it is going to be very partial. Um, but there are definitely some moments that stand out. Halloween night, 1980, when Jennifer, a friend of mine, I was a freshman in college. She was a year or two older. Jennifer Corse was her name. She was a TA in a class I was in, and we became friends. And she invited me to take some mushrooms. And we took some mushrooms that night and went out and hung around this cemetery. And I remember it being a full moon and it was, autumn. And so it was kind of crisp and clear and bright from the moonlight. And that experience of tripping on mushrooms that was a very before and after kind of thing. Um, and I'm not recommending this to anyone. Please be very clear about that because people have different experiences with psychedelics. But for me, it was a feeling of like, oh my God, this is reality. This is what I've been missing. This is what I have some vague memory of, whether it's from another life or from childhood or from my dreams or I don't know where, but I've been here a lot. Um, and it was so familiar that I think from that point on, I have had the sense that what we call reality is the dream, right? That this rational, three-dimensional, got up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head, like that life is the dream. And that there is a deeper, more real realm that we awaken to. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's been my sense my whole life. And that experience with psychedelics and then subsequent experiences with psychedelics have reinforced that sense that things are not what they seem, which for me was a very comforting, liberating kind of insight. But for other people, that can be a very terrifying insight, leaving them, unsure of what's real and what isn't. For me, it kind of had the opposite effect. So that was a big one. The moment when I was in Alaska and I sort of looked at the trajectory of my life that I thought I was on at that point, going to grad school and becoming a literature professor and getting tenure and, all that. I looked at that and realized I didn't know enough about life to make any kind of commitment to that. And I remember where I was sitting, looking out over Cook Inlet and, on the bluff outside of Kenai, Alaska. And I remember, coming to this conclusion that I was going to give myself at least the next 10 years to just fuck around and to not have an agenda, to not have goals, to not have, I mean, I had goals, but they were kind of anti-goals. I was committed to not committing. I was, um, my commitment was to take 10 years to try to understand the world, understand myself, and then with that deeper understanding, choose what to do with my life. Um, that was a profound moment because I felt the walls closing in on me, like I was going to graduate next year, and then I got to go to grad school, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do that, and then I'll be 30, and then I'll, get a job, and what am I going to do? And it was all the hypocrisy of it sort of became very clear to me. Like, oh, I'm going to teach all these books about adventure, Joseph Conrad and Herman Melville, and I'm going to teach about the writings of people who actually had really rich, interesting lives. But my life? What about my life? I'm just going to be another fucking 27-year-old tenure track college professor? No, I want to have that life. Maybe I'll write those books. I want to live those stories. I don't want to talk about those stories. So that was an important moment, because I knew that meant, okay, you're going to lose 10 years, like you're going to be 10 years behind everyone else if you choose to try to do something where that matters, where you getting an early start matters and having all that experience and all that. But I just thought, I don't care. Whatever I end up doing, I'll be better at it for having taken this time. And also, who gives a shit? Like, life is for living. If I end up never making any real money or, whatever, like, that was never the point. Being famous or whatever, that was never the point. For me, the point was always to experience it. It's like people, I don't know. It's like one of the things that annoys me the most is if I'm having a meal with someone and they talk about another meal, like, oh, this pizza's really good. Like, yeah, man, I had a great pizza when I was in Rome last year, and it annoys me so much I want to slap them. But it's like, how can you not see that you're sacrificing this moment, the food in your mouth? You're sacrificing the experience of this moment right now in order to talk about some other moment that was similar to this moment. What were you talking about in Rome when you were eating that pizza? Like, you're missing the fucking point. So that's how I felt about life. It's like, I want to live the fuck out of this thing. And if that means I don't make a bunch of money or I don't, have status or whatever, like, okay. But who knows? Who knows how it'll work out? But the primary objective for me was, I want to fucking live it. I want to be surprised. I want to be challenged. I want to be disgusted sometimes. Yeah, very, I think I was very affected by Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, and Walden, where he talks about how he went to the woods because he wanted to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its most essential elements. And like, what is this life? What really is it? Like, get rid of all the distractions and all the bullshit and all the advertising and all the lies and all that. What is the substance of this life. And, again, like, what do peas taste like? Just give me the peas. I want to taste the peas, God damn it. Not peas that have been in a can in the fucking closet and in a truck and in a fucking warehouse. Get me peas from the ground. And yeah, if there's a little saute and a little olive oil and a little garlic and a little ham that brings out the pea flavor even better, then fuck yeah. But do not dump a bunch of Velveeta cheese sauce over that shit. That's what I felt about life. That's why those peas affected me so much, because it's like, that's it. That's the secret. Give me good, simple, basic, essential. That's what I want. And I understand their sacrifice. I understand that in my case, that meant no kids and a lot of insecurity and a lot of loneliness, because you're not doing that with people, because that's a very individual kind of life you're living. And so you end up being 63 years old and like it's kind of lonely, because yeah, I've had really, really good friends in my life, but one of them's in Holland, one of them's in Australia, one of them's in Spain. They're all over the world, and they sure as fuck aren't here in Crestone. And that's probably the steepest price that I've paid for living this life. But it gets back to the question I was asking you, which is, do we have a choice? Or are we just living the life that we're destined to live? I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Thanks for listening. I'm going to play you out with a tune I just heard recently for the first time, and I really love it. It's unusual. It's Martin, what's his name? Martin Luke Brown, I think. Oh, I lost my note. And it's called "To Be a Man." See what you think. Thanks for listening. Thank you for your support, which allows me to keep this a bullshit-free, commercial-free space, which I understand is a luxury in this day and age. But if you appreciate that kind of space as much as I do, I hope you'll continue to support the podcast however you can. Thank you for listening. Bye.